Why would a waitress protect a napkin after someone smashed a wine glass into her face? The question cut through the private dining room a second after the crystal exploded. Red wine sprayed across Lena Brooks's black apron. A silver tray crashed against marble. Half a dozen wealthy guests recoiled from the blood running down her cheek. But while everyone stared at the broken glass, Lena dropped to one knee and grabbed a cream-colored napkin from beneath the table. Her fingers closed around it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Give me that," someone said. She didn't. 3 hours earlier, Lena had been doing what she always did, becoming invisible. The private dining room above Romano's casino was built for people whose watches cost more than her car. Men in tailored suits discussed mergers. Women in diamonds discussed charities. Lena moved between them carrying bottles, plates, folded linens, and the practiced understanding that nobody in rooms like this ever remembered the waitress's name. She was 31, plus size, exhausted, and halfway through a double shift she couldn't afford to refuse. Her old phone sat in her apron pocket with 3 unread messages from her landlord and one from her younger brother asking if she could help with next month's tuition payment. The answer was no. It had been no for a long time. Across the room sat Vincent Moretti, the owner, the man nobody interrupted. He occupied the corner seat the way storms occupied the horizon, quietly, but with consequences. He wasn't speaking. He rarely needed to. People watched his eyes the way sailors watched dark clouds. The fundraiser's guest of honor, Evelyn Cross, was speaking instead. Her smile was flawless. Her voice warm. Her reputation spotless. She raised millions for hospitals. She thanked every server by name. She even thanked Lena. "You have such steady hands," Evelyn said when Lena refreshed her water. It sounded kind. Somehow it made Lena uncomfortable. 20 minutes later, Lena noticed something small. Not suspicious, just wrong. A server she didn't recognize approached Vincent's table carrying fresh linens. The man wore the correct uniform, but the sleeves were too long and the name tag sat slightly crooked. Most people would never notice. Lena did. Years of working crowded dining rooms had taught her to see details nobody else cared about. The stranger replaced a napkin beside Vincent's wine glass. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then he disappeared through a side door marked staff only. Lena frowned. She glanced toward the service station. Nobody else seemed to have seen it. She almost ignored it. Almost. Then she noticed a faint green discoloration near the edge of the replacement napkin when the chandelier light struck it just right. Barely visible. Gone a second later. Strange enough that she quietly took a picture with her old phone before returning to work. By the time dessert arrived, she had nearly convinced herself she was imagining things. Then the shouting started. One angry guest. One accusation. One thrown wine glass. And now blood dripped from her jaw onto the cream-colored fabric clenched in her hand. The room fell silent as Evelyn Cross stepped forward with concern painted perfectly across her face and reached for the napkin. That's when Vincent Moretti finally looked away from the blood and noticed the faint green stain near Lena's trembling thumb. The green stain was no larger than a thumbnail, yet it seemed to pull every ounce of attention out of Vincent Moretti's eyes. Not the blood on Lena's cheek. Not the shattered crystal glittering across the white tablecloth. The stain. Evelyn Cross followed his gaze and smiled with perfect concern. "She's hurt," she said softly. "Someone should get her to a hospital." Her hand remained extended toward the napkin. Lena tightened her grip. The room felt colder. Around them, wealthy donors exchanged uneasy looks. Nobody wanted trouble at a charity dinner. Trouble was for other neighborhoods, other people. A waitress bleeding beside a billionaire's table was already more reality than most of them liked. "Miss Brooks," the restaurant manager said sharply, appearing at her side. "Hand over the napkin." Lena looked up. Blood slid warm along her jawline. "No." The word surprised even her. Silence followed. Not loud silence. The dangerous kind. The kind that made people stop. Breathing. The manager blinked. "Excuse me." I said no. Her voice trembled but did not break. Evelyn's expression remained gentle. "Sweetheart, nobody is trying to take anything from you. You're in shock. Let us help." "Sweetheart." The word landed like a hand on the back of her neck. Kind. Controlling. Designed to make resistance look unreasonable. Lena had heard versions of that voice her entire life. The voice people used when they wanted obedience wrapped in gratitude. Vincent still hadn't spoken. He simply watched. Then he asked a question so quietly several guests missed it. Why that napkin? Every eye turned toward Lena. She swallowed. Because somebody changed it. A few people laughed. The manager sighed. Evelyn lowered her gaze as if embarrassed on Lena's behalf. She's confused. No. Lena wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand. A server replaced it about 20 minutes ago. The manager frowned. Nobody replaced anything. Yes, they did. You have proof. Lena hesitated. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her old phone. The screen was cracked across one corner. She opened the photo she had taken earlier. It wasn't a good picture. Mostly a centerpiece and half a dessert tray. But in the background stood the unfamiliar server. Crooked name tag. Oversized sleeves. One hand reaching toward Vincent's table. Vincent took the phone. The room waited. He studied the image for several seconds before passing it to the head of security standing near the door. Find him, he said. Just 3 words. No raised voice. No threat. Yet the security chief moved immediately. Evelyn's smile faltered for the first time. Barely. Lena almost missed it. Almost. The manager tried again. This proves nothing. Actually, Lena said quietly, it proves he wasn't assigned here. The manager looked annoyed. And how would you know that? Because I checked the shift board before dinner. A small detail. A waitress detail. The kind powerful people ignored. Vincent's gaze returned to her. Not trust. Not yet. Something colder. Evaluation. The industrial dishwasher started roaring in the kitchen beyond the swinging doors. Plates rattled. Glassware clinked. For one brief second, life sounded normal again. Then a security guard hurried back into the room, carrying a tablet. He leaned down beside Vincent and whispered something. Vincent's expression didn't change. That made it worse. What? Evelyn asked lightly. Vincent took the tablet. On the screen was footage from the hallway outside the private dining room. The unknown server appeared clearly at 7:42 p.m., then vanished at 7:43. 1 minute of video. 1 minute missing. Because the next 37 seconds had been deleted. 37 seconds. In a building covered by hundreds of cameras, 37 seconds had simply ceased to exist. Nobody spoke at first. The tablet remained in Vincent Moretti's hand while the frozen image of the hallway reflected faintly in the dark glass of the dining room windows. Lena felt blood drying against her skin. The cut on her cheek stung every time she breathed. Across the room, Evelyn Cross folded her hands neatly in front of her. Technical issues happen, she said with a sympathetic smile. Especially in older systems. It was a reasonable explanation. Too reasonable. Vincent's eyes moved from the screen to her face. Not accusing. Measuring. Security footage could fail. Cameras glitched. Hard drives corrupted. Everyone in the room wanted the explanation to be that simple. Everyone except Lena. The system isn't old, she said quietly. The manager immediately exhaled in irritation. Miss Brooks, that's enough. No, let her speak, Vincent said. For words. Calm. Flat. Heavy enough to stop the room. Lena swallowed. The cameras were upgraded in January. She looked toward the security chief. Right after the poker room incident. The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Because she was right. She knew because she had spent 3 nights serving coffee and sandwiches to contractors installing the equipment. The manager rubbed his forehead. You're a waitress. I work here. There was a difference. Nobody seemed eager to admit it. Evelyn offered a gentle laugh. Trauma can make people connect unrelated details. Again that voice. Soft enough to sound compassionate. Sharp enough to make Lena seem irrational. But something had changed. Not in Vincent. In Evelyn. For the first time since the glass shattered, she stopped looking at Lena and started looking at the tablet. Only for a second. Then she caught herself. Too late. Lena noticed. So did Vincent. Silence stretched across the room again. Then Lena remembered something. Not a revelation. A detail. Small enough to miss. Important enough to bother her. She reached into the pocket of her blood-stained apron and pulled out her old phone again. The battery sat at 9%. A cracked corner glowed weakly beneath the chandelier light. She opened the photo from earlier and zoomed in. Pixel by pixel. The stranger stood beside Vincent's table. Crooked name tag. Oversized sleeves. One hand near the napkin, the other near his waist. Lena enlarged the image further. There. Nobody saw it immediately. Vincent stepped closer. The room seemed to inhale. Attached to the stranger's belt was a key card. Not unusual. Employees carried access cards all the time, but the color was wrong. Staff cards were gray. This one was black. Executive access, the kind issued to fewer than a dozen people in the entire property. The security chief frowned. Zoom in. Lena did. The image blurred but held together just enough. A number became visible beneath the barcode. 3 digits. Vincent stared at it, then slowly handed the phone to security. Run it. Evelyn shifted in her chair. Barely. Her hand moved toward her purse before stopping halfway. Another tiny mistake. Another crack. The manager attempted a smile. Even if it's real, he could have found the card. Nobody answered him. 2 minutes later, a security officer returned carrying a printed access log. He looked unsettled. Very unsettled. He handed the paper directly to Vincent. Vincent read it once. Then again. His expression never changed. Somehow that was becoming the most frightening part. Finally, he lifted his eyes toward Evelyn. Not accusing. Not angry. Just still. The access card captured in Lena's photograph had entered the private dining floor at 7:41 p.m. The card belonged to Evelyn Cross's personal assistant. The access card belonged to Evelyn Cross's personal assistant. Nobody rushed to conclusions. People like the ones sitting in that dining room never rushed. They hired consultants to explain problems, attorneys to soften them, and publicists to bury them. The room shifted into that familiar rhythm almost immediately. There are dozens of innocent explanations, said a silver-haired board member from the hospital foundation. His tone was calm, reasonable, the kind of voice that sounded trustworthy because it had spent 30 years speaking into microphones. Assistants lend credentials. Staff make mistakes. We shouldn't destroy reputations over assumptions. Several guests nodded. Relief moved through the room like a breeze. They wanted an explanation that allowed them to finish dessert. Evelyn lowered her eyes modestly. Thank you, Robert. Then she turned toward Lena with a look that seemed almost maternal. Miss Brooks, you've had a difficult evening. You've been injured, embarrassed, and put under enormous stress. No one blames you for being upset. The words landed softly. The message underneath them did not. You're emotional. You're confused. You're imagining things. Lena felt every eye return to her. Not to the blood on her cheek. To her body. Her apron. Her place in the room. She suddenly became aware of how large she looked standing among polished executives and donors dressed in custom suits. She knew that feeling. Being measured before speaking. Judged before being heard. The restaurant manager stepped forward holding a printed incident statement. Just sign this, Lena. His voice carried the weary patience people reserve for children and difficult customers. It says a guest became agitated, a glass was accidentally knocked from the table, and you suffered a minor injury while serving. Lena took the paper. Read it once. Then again. The room waited. The statement was clean, neat, convenient. It erased the stranger. The missing footage. The access card. The napkin. It erased everything. I'm not signing it. The manager blinked. Excuse me. It's not true. The pressure in the room increased instantly. Not loud. Worse. The kind that arrived through silence and disappointed expressions. A charity trustee sighed heavily. One guest checked his watch. Another avoided looking at her entirely. Evelyn's smile never moved. No one is asking you to lie. That's exactly what you're asking. The words came out quiet. Steady. Lena folded the paper in half and placed it back on the table. She didn't slam it. Didn't make a scene. Somehow that made it harder to dismiss. The manager's jaw tightened. You realize refusing to cooperate may affect your employment. There it was. Not a threat. A consequence. The wealthy rarely threatened people directly. They simply reminded them what they stood to lose. Lena's fingers closed around the stained napkin inside her apron pocket. Rent. Bills. Her brother's tuition. Everything flashed through her mind. Then she lifted her chin. Then it affects my employment. For the first time, Vincent Moretti looked away from the evidence and looked directly at her. Not at her uniform. Not at her size. At her. The room went quiet again. Across the table, Evelyn reached for a glass of water. A small movement. Almost invisible. But her hand shook just enough for a drop to spill onto the linen. She immediately set the glass down. Most people missed it. Vincent did not. Neither did Lena. Then a security officer entered carrying a small slip of paper. A receipt. He handed it to Vincent without a word. Vincent glanced down. The receipt showed a coffee purchase from the casino cafe at 7:18 p.m. 2 drinks. One paid for by Evelyn's assistant. The second paid for by a man whose employee record did not exist anywhere in the building. The receipt remained on the table between crystal glasses and untouched dessert plates. Such a small thing. 2 coffees. 1 timestamp. 1 name that didn't exist. Yet nobody seemed eager to touch it. The room had developed a strange gravity around evidence. Every new piece pulled conversation lower, slower, heavier. Evelyn Cross folded her hands again. Perfect posture. Perfect composure. That proves someone bought coffee, she said gently. Nothing more. The explanation sounded reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. The wealthy rarely survived scandals by denying facts. They survived by shrinking facts until they seemed harmless. Several guests visibly relaxed. A few even nodded. Vincent Moretti did not. He picked up the receipt and turned it over once. Then again. His eyes settled on the bottom corner. Silence stretched. Lena knew that silence by now. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. "What's wrong?" asked the hospital trustee. Vincent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward Lena. "You kept the napkin." It wasn't a question. She nodded. Blood had dried stiff across one side of her apron. The fabric pulled every time she moved. "Show me." The manager immediately stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, she's contaminated the item. We should wait for professionals." "Show me," Vincent repeated. Lena carefully removed the folded napkin from her pocket. Every eye followed it. The cream-colored fabric looked ordinary until she opened it beneath the chandelier light. Then the faint green discoloration appeared again. Barely visible. Almost nothing. Yet now nobody could stop staring at it. Evelyn tilted her head. "A cleaning chemical, perhaps." "No," Lena said quietly. "If it was cleaning solution, the fibers would bleach around the edges." She hesitated, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she sounded explaining fabric chemistry to people worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This didn't. A board member gave a thin smile. "And we're trusting laboratory analysis from a waitress now." The words were polite. The room still winced. Vincent noticed that too. Lena lowered her eyes briefly. Not from shame. From restraint. Then she reached into another pocket of her apron. "No." She placed something beside the receipt. "You're trusting this." It was a wine order slip. Wrinkled. Slightly stained. One of dozens she had carried all evening. Most people would have thrown it away. Lena never did. Years of balancing mistakes made by richer people had taught her to keep paper. The order listed every bottle served at the table. Timestamps. Table numbers. Initials. Vincent picked it up. The room waited. Lena pointed to one line. "This bottle was delivered at 7:14. Then she pointed to the coffee receipt. "Coffee purchased at 7:18. 4 minutes later. The same initials appeared on both documents. Not Evelyn's assistant. The unknown man. Maybe he worked both locations, someone offered quickly. Maybe. Lena nodded. Then his employee ID should exist. Nobody answered. Vincent looked back at the receipt. Then at the wine slip. Then at the access log. 3 separate pieces. 3 small inconsistencies. Alone, meaningless. Together, something else. Across the table, Evelyn finally reached for her phone. A tiny movement. Instinctive. Human. She stopped when she realized Vincent was watching. Too late. He had already seen the screen light up. One unread message sat at the top. The sender's name was hidden. The preview was not. It read, "Did they find the slip?" The message disappeared from Evelyn's screen almost instantly. One swipe. One practiced movement. But Vincent Moretti had already seen it. He set the receipt down beside the wine slip and said nothing. Somehow that silence felt heavier than anger. Around the table, people shifted in their chairs. Nobody touched their coffee. Nobody touched dessert. The room no longer felt like a fundraiser. It felt like a place where something had been buried badly and the ground was beginning to sink. "We're chasing shadows," one board member finally said. "A text message isn't evidence." Vincent looked at him. The man stopped talking. Not because of a threat. Because Vincent's attention had settled on him completely, and that was somehow worse. 5 minutes later, the dinner ended. No speeches. No dramatic accusations. Guests left in clusters, speaking in low voices. Evelyn departed with the same composed smile she had arrived with. Only one thing had changed. She did not look at Lena when she walked out. The industrial dishwasher hummed behind the kitchen wall. Water rushed through pipes. Somewhere a stack of plates rattled. Ordinary sounds. Human sounds. They seemed strangely distant. Lena stood near the service station, holding the stained napkin. Her cheek had swollen. Blood had dried into a dark line along her jaw. She expected security to escort her out. Expected termination paperwork. Instead, Vincent's attorney arrived carrying a leather folder. Mr. Moretti would like copies of the personnel files. He said, all temporary hires from the last 30 days. Full access logs. Vendor records. Shift changes. The manager looked surprised. Tonight. No further explanation followed. 2 hours later, rain tapped softly against the casino's upper office windows. Vincent sat alone behind a dark wood desk. A lamp cast a circle of gold across contracts, access reports, and personnel records. His attorney reviewed files. His private physician examined photographs of the napkin stain. His head of security compared timestamps. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody speculated. They simply kept finding things. A shift log altered in different ink. A temporary employee application missing a social security number. A vendor account linked to a warehouse that officially did not exist. Small things, each one explainable. Together, they formed a shape. Lena sat across the room with a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Nobody had asked her to stay. Nobody had asked her to leave. She watched rain slide down the glass. Her phone buzzed. Another hospital bill notification for her mother. Past due. She locked the screen immediately. Vincent noticed anyway. How much? He asked. What? The bill. Lena looked down at the phone. That's not why I'm here. I didn't ask why. She hesitated. $7,400. Vincent nodded once. Nothing more. Most people with power assumed money explained everything. Lena was tired of that assumption. I don't want anyone paying it. The words came out before she could stop them. The attorney looked up. Vincent remained still. Then what do you want? Lena stared at the napkin in her hands. I want whoever lied to stop lying. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that couldn't be purchased or negotiated away. An hour later, the physician entered carrying a report. He placed it on the desk. Vincent read it once. Then a second time. His eyes moved slowly to a contract buried halfway down the stack. A temporary succession agreement. One he had signed months ago without much thought. The document transferred operational authority if he became medically incapacitated. There, on the final page, sat a witness. Signature he had seen hundreds of times over the years. Evelyn Cross. For the first time that night, Vincent felt something colder than suspicion. He realized the woman he had questioned all evening was not the person he had failed to see. The person he had failed to see was sitting across from him holding a blood-stained napkin, while the woman he had trusted for 7 years appeared on every piece of paper that mattered. Vincent closed the succession agreement and slid it back into the folder. Nobody in the office spoke. Rain continued tracing silver lines down the windows overlooking the casino district. Somewhere below, a neon sign buzzed faintly in the darkness. Lena sat with the stained napkin folded carefully beside her coffee cup. She should have gone home hours ago. Instead, she watched Vincent pick up his phone and make a single call. Tomorrow, he said. Private luncheon. Same guest list. Then he hung up. No explanation. No discussion. The next afternoon, the private dining room looked exactly as it had before the glass shattered. Same chandelier. Same white linen. Same polished silver. Same table. Vincent had insisted on it. Nothing moved. Nothing replaced. Even the centerpiece sat in the same position. Lena noticed that immediately. People who worked in rooms like this learned layouts the way musicians learned notes. Evelyn arrived 15 minutes early. Elegant as always. Composed as always. She wore cream-colored silk and a smile that suggested yesterday had been an unfortunate misunderstanding. I'm relieved everyone is being sensible, she said warmly to a board member. Rumors can become very unfair. Across the room, Vincent listened without appearing to listen. A crystal wine glass sat untouched in front of him. He never lifted it, never looked at it. That bothered Lena more than if he had stared directly at it. The trap began quietly. Vincent's attorney distributed copies of a revised partnership proposal. Nothing dramatic, just paperwork. The sort of thing wealthy people signed every day. While everyone reviewed pages, Vincent asked a seemingly casual question. Evelyn, when was the last time you spoke with your assistant? She didn't look up immediately. Just half a second. Barely noticeable. Yesterday morning. Before or after the fundraiser? Before. Smooth. Instant. Confident. Lena felt something tighten in her stomach. Vincent nodded once. Nothing more. Then he changed subjects. 10 minutes passed. Contracts rustled. Ice melted slowly in untouched drinks. A phone vibrated somewhere on the table. Nobody reached for it. Then Lena saw it. A tiny detail, small enough for everyone else to miss. Evelyn's handbag rested beside her chair. The zipper sat partially open. Inside, she glimpsed the corner of a black key card. Not gray. Black. Executive access. The same color as the card from the photograph. Lena leaned slightly toward Vincent when nobody was watching. Her assistant is left-handed. Vincent didn't react. What? He asked quietly. Yesterday. The coffee receipt. Lena kept her eyes on the table. The signature slants left. But the person in my photo carried the tray with his left hand and adjusted the key card with his right. I kept thinking something was wrong. Vincent remained silent. She continued. It wasn't her assistant. For the first time all afternoon, Vincent's gaze shifted. Not toward Evelyn. Toward the unopened envelope sitting beside his wine glass. He opened it slowly. Inside were new security images recovered from a backup server. Images nobody else at the table had seen yet. One showed the unknown man entering through a service corridor. Another showed him receiving something from a person just outside camera range. Vincent slid the photograph across the table. You said yesterday morning. Evelyn looked down. Her smile flickered. Just once. The recovered image showed a timestamp from 6:58 p.m. and reflected faintly in the service corridor mirror behind the stranger was Evelyn Cross herself. For the first time since this began, she looked directly at Lena. Not past her. Not through her. At her. And in that moment, she understood the waitress was no longer standing alone. For a long moment, nobody moved. Evelyn's eyes remained locked on Lena. The recovered image sat in the center of the table like something alive. The chandelier light reflected off the glossy paper. One photograph. One reflection. One crack in a story that had held for years. Then Evelyn smiled. It was smaller now. Tighter. A reflection isn't proof. Her voice remained elegant. Controlled. You of all people should understand how misleading images can be. Nobody answered. Vincent reached for the unopened envelope beside his glass. The one he had not mentioned. The one his attorney had placed there 20 minutes earlier. He slid a thumb beneath the seal and removed a thin stack of documents. No drama. No speech. Just paper. The room watched. The first page was a medical report. The second was a toxicology analysis. The third was a laboratory comparison. Vincent laid them side by side next to the stained napkin. Silence thickened. Lena recognized the green mark immediately. The physician spoke quietly. The substance found on the napkin matches traces recovered from a sample taken from Mr. Moretti's wine glass. No one interrupted him. The concentration was low. It would not have killed him. Another pause. It would have produced symptoms consistent with a sudden neurological event. A board member frowned. A stroke? Something that would look very much like one. Several faces lost color. Vincent looked down at the papers. Months ago, he had signed the succession agreement without reading every page. Months ago, he had trusted the people standing beside him. Months ago, he had assumed loyalty was permanent. Lena watched something shift behind his eyes. Not fear. Regret. The attorney placed another document on the table. The original succession contract. Then a second version. Nearly identical. Except for one page. One date. One witness signature added later. Evelyn's. The attorney pointed to the amendment. Operational control transfers immediately if Mr. Moretti becomes medically incapacitated. Nobody spoke. The sound of ice settling inside a forgotten glass seemed loud enough to break the room. Evelyn finally stood. This is absurd. Her composure cracked for the first time. You're building a conspiracy out of paperwork and coincidences. Lena slowly reached into her apron pocket. The same apron. The same one stained with blood from the night she had been humiliated in this room. She removed her old phone. No. Her voice was quiet. Steady. Not coincidences. She opened a file. The backup had restored automatically earlier that morning. An audio clip. 23 seconds long. She pressed play. The room filled with muffled restaurant noise. A service hallway. Distant dishes. Then a voice. The unknown man. What if he notices? A second voice answered. Calm. Female. Familiar. He won't. Replace the napkin and leave. Nobody breathed. Evelyn closed her eyes. Just once. Vincent did not. He stared at the table. At the contract. At the toxicology report. at the blood-stained napkin that a waitress had protected while everyone else tried to throw it away. When the recording ended, the silence hurt. Lena was the first person to look away. Vincent was the last. Slowly, he removed his glasses and set them beside the evidence. Then he looked toward his attorney. His voice was calm enough to terrify everyone in the room. "Call my attorney." No one argued after that. The room seemed to collapse inward under the weight of its own silence. Evelyn Cross remained standing for several seconds, her hands resting lightly on the back of her chair, as if she could still regain control through posture alone. Then the attorneys began speaking. Quietly, efficiently, the way people do when consequences stop being theoretical. Within 48 hours, the charity board suspended her authority pending investigation. Financial records were frozen. Donors withdrew support. The assistant disappeared into a deposition room with federal investigators and a lawyer who looked exhausted before the first question was even asked. The succession agreement was voided. The altered documents were entered into evidence. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. The truth had done the work already. A week later, the restaurant manager sat across from Vincent in a conference room overlooking the casino floor. The man who had pushed the false statement toward Lena now stared at his own hands. Records showed complaints buried. Incident reports rewritten. Staff concerns ignored. Not crimes. Worse in some ways. Habits. Systems. The quiet machinery that taught people at the bottom to stay quiet. By the end of the meeting, he was gone. New policies followed. Every employee report would be documented. Every security concern preserved. No manager could destroy evidence without review. The rule was written into company procedure under a simple title: the Brooks Protocol. Lena hated the name. It stayed anyway. Her mother's hospital bills vanished, but not through a secret payment slipped under a door. Vincent's legal team discovered insurance denials that should never have happened. The claims were reopened, approved, corrected. Her mother's physical therapy resumed within the month. Her brother's tuition fund was protected through a scholarship program established for employees' families. When Vincent offered Lena a check large enough to change her life, she pushed it back across the desk. "That's not what I was trying to do." He nodded. "I know." For a moment, neither spoke. Then he handed her something else. A personnel file. Corrected. Updated. Her full name. Her actual responsibilities. Every training certification she had completed. Every recommendation. Every detail that had been ignored because people saw the apron before they saw the person. "Read page 3, Vincent said. Lena did. Her new title sat near the top. Director of Food Safety and Employee Standards. She blinked twice before looking up. "You trust me with this?" Vincent was quiet for several seconds. "I trust the person who protected evidence while everyone else protected themselves." The private dining room reopened 2 months later. Same chandelier. Same polished silver. Same white linen. Different atmosphere. Near the entrance stood a small glass display case. Inside rested a cream-colored napkin sealed behind archival glass. Beside it sat the black apron stained with wine and dried blood. Years earlier, those things would have been thrown away before sunrise. Now a brass plaque sat beneath them. It read, She saw what others ignored. Employees stopped to read it. New hires asked about it. The story traveled through the building. Not as gossip. As a warning. As a lesson. One evening after closing, Lena finished a paperwork review and walked through the quiet dining room. The lights were low. The city glowed beyond the windows. Vincent sat alone at a corner table drinking coffee that had long gone cold. For a while neither spoke. Then Lena smiled faintly and pointed toward the display case. "You know that napkin still looks ugly." A corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile. Almost. Maybe. She adjusted her clean apron, picked up her old phone from the table, and headed toward the door. Halfway there she stopped. "People kept telling me I was imagining things." Vincent looked up, and Lena glanced back. "Turns out I was paying attention." Vincent watched her leave beneath the warm dining room lights. And for the first time in a very long time, the most powerful person in the building understood that truth had not won because someone important spoke. It won because someone everyone ignored refused to stop speaking.